When did ancient humans first feel grief? There is a cave in northern Iraq called Shanidar. Inside it, in 1960, archaeologist Ralph Solecki uncovered something that changed the way we think about ancient humans forever. Buried 60,000 years ago, a Neanderthal man lay in the earth surrounded by pollen from flowers. Yarrow, Groundsel, Grape, hyacinth. Someone had placed flowers on his grave. That detail has been debated ever since. Some researchers say the pollen was carried in by burrowing rodents. Others say it was deliberate. But the debate itself tells you something important. We are so startled by the idea that a Neanderthal might have grieved, might have felt something worth marking with flowers, that we argue for decades about whether it's even possible. It is possible, and the evidence is older than Shanidar. Grief is one of the oldest emotions in the animal kingdom, not just in humans. Elephants return to the bones of dead companions and stand over them in silence, touching them with their trunks for hours. Dolphins have been observed carrying their dead calves on their backs for days, refusing to let the bodies sink. Chimpanzees sit beside the bodies of their mothers, sometimes for hours, sometimes refusing to eat, sometimes refusing to leave. Crows hold what researchers have started calling funerals, gathering in silence around a dead crow, studying it before dispersing. These behaviors are not cultural. They are not learned. They are responses to a specific kind of loss that something very deep in the brain recognizes as different from other losses. The neuroscience of grief, in humans and in other animals, centers on the same neural pathways: the anterior cingulate cortex, the prefrontal cortex, the circuits that process attachment and social bonding. When that bond is severed, the brain registers it as damage. Not metaphorical damage, literal neurological disruption. Grief, at its neurological core, is the brain searching for someone who is no longer there. When did that happen in our lineage? When did the brain become sophisticated enough to form the kinds of attachments that, when broken, produce this specific pain? Anthropologist Barbara King, who has studied grief across species for decades, argues that the capacity for grief requires two things: the ability to form individual bonds with specific others, not just with the group in general, and the cognitive ability to register absence. To notice that someone who was there is no longer there, and to feel that as a wound rather than simply a change in the environment. Both of those capacities appear to predate Homo sapiens by a significant margin. The fossil record gives us glimpses that are hard to dismiss. A Homo heidelbergensis burial at Atapuerca in Spain, 430,000 years ago, bodies carefully placed at the bottom of a shaft, not scattered by predators, not abandoned where they fell. Something intentional. Someone carried those bodies there. A Neanderthal child buried at La Féracie in France, 70,000 years ago, in a flexed position that some researchers interpret as echoing sleep, the body arranged as if resting, not discarded. Over and over, across sites separated by tens of thousands of years and thousands of miles, we find the same pattern. Ancient humans doing something with their dead that required effort, required intention, and served no obvious survival purpose. Which means it served an emotional purpose. But here is the part that most discussions of ancient grief leave out. Grief is not just painful. It is, in some ways, adaptive. Evolutionary psychologists have spent years trying to understand why natural selection preserved an emotion this disabling, an emotion that, at its most intense, prevents eating, sleeping, functioning. Why didn't it get selected out over hundreds of thousands of years of brutal natural selection? The answer is that grief does something else, something essential. It consolidates memory. When you grieve someone, the brain encodes the importance of that person with an intensity that ordinary experience cannot match. They become part of the structure of how you understand the world. Their absence reshapes your map of reality more forcefully than their presence ever could. Grief is how the brain says, "This mattered. This cannot be forgotten." It also signals to the group that a bond existed, and that bonds matter. In a Paleolithic community where cooperation was literally survival, the public expression of grief was also a public declaration. I am capable of deep attachment. I can be trusted to form the bonds that make us function. I am not a threat to the social fabric. I am a part of it. John Archer, whose research on the evolutionary function of grief has been influential for decades, argues that grief is essentially the cost of love. an unavoidable byproduct of the same attachment system that made humans so extraordinarily cooperative. You cannot have one without the other. The brain that is capable of forming the bonds required for hunter-gatherer survival is the same brain that breaks when those bonds are severed. The capacity for grief and the capacity for love are, neurologically speaking, the same capacity. This creates something almost paradoxical. Grief, the most disabling of human emotions, may be one of the clearest signs of evolutionary success. Because only a species capable of forming bonds strong enough to break was capable of forming bonds strong enough to survive. And here's what the archaeology suggests. Ancient humans already understood this in some wordless way. At a site in Morocco called Grotte de Pigeons, researchers found the remains of two infants buried together with shell ornaments, 82,000 years ago. At a Neanderthal site in La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France, an elderly man was buried in a pit. An individual who, by the evidence in his bones, had been crippled by arthritis for years and could not have survived without sustained care from others. Someone had fed him, someone had carried him, and when he died, someone buried him carefully. These are not the behaviors of animals that simply tolerate each other's presence. These are the behaviors of creatures capable of something we would recognize, without hesitation, as love. And where love existed, grief followed. What strikes me most, looking at all of this research together, is how consistent the pattern is across time. The ancient human who knelt over a body in a cave 60,000 years ago was doing something recognizable. The arrangement of limbs, the placement of objects, the gathering of others to witness. These are not primitive approximations of what we do at funerals today. They are the same thing.
The spirits of the mammoth demand tribute.
Identical function.
If we do not hunt them now,
because the feeling
winter
hasn't
will
changed.
consume us all.
The architecture of grief, the hollow in the chest, the reaching for someone who isn't there, the way ordinary objects become unbearable because they belong to the wrong person. This is not a modern invention. It is as old as attachment itself. It arrived in our lineage before we had language to describe it, before we had religion to frame it, before we had any of the cultural structures we now use to manage it. It arrived because love arrived, and because both are written into us at the level of neural circuitry, not culture. The ancient human who stood over that grave in Shanidar, 60,000 years ago, felt something we would recognize instantly if we could see it on their face. The set of the jaw, the stillness of the body, the eyes that keep returning to one place and finding it empty. We have been grieving for longer than we have been fully human. And somehow, in that grief, in the willingness to feel the full weight of loss rather than simply move on, we became more human still. The flowers may or may not have been placed deliberately, but something was placed there. Something that said, this person was here. This person mattered. This person will not be forgotten. That is grief, and it is ancient beyond reckoning.